because I'm keen to, I feel like we've talked a lot about diversity and the Black Lives Matter movement and stuff, but I'm keen for you not to just be
associated with that.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? Like, you've got other stuff that you do.
Thanks, Kate.
But you know what I mean? It's always like, oh, Ashanti will talk about that. It's like, actually, she does do that.
It's occupational hazard, though, as I said to you.
Yeah.
And that's why it's important not to be the only one. Like, if there were more people, then they wouldn't think you're the only person who could offer on this. There'll be other people. They could talk to someone who's Italian. You know, if there was more, then it wouldn't feel like that to anyone. But yeah, so I'm Ashanti. I am an events entrepreneur. I'm mostly in event tech. I spend a lot of time in the event tech world. And I also try to help the events industry to become more diverse and inclusive in a very holistic way. So we look at the overall health of workplace cultures and whether or not people are happy, safe, and they're enjoying their work.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for speaking to me. It's lovely to have to be chatting with you. We've entitled this interview "Questions That White People Are Too Afraid to Ask."
Yes.
And it was kind of, well, it was my idea really, because it came from a place of me having some questions that I feel nervous and embarrassed about, and this is a whole rabbit hole that we could go down. But I just think it's a really useful platform to kind of get your opinion on it and educate everybody.
Sure.
So maybe we could start with you telling us a few examples of what you've experienced in the past in terms of systemic racism.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, Kate, because you and I are actual good business buddies now, and we have chatted about this. You know, the more kind of, I suppose, easy to understand examples are in the course of business. Essentially, I've shared with you about how changing the front-facing team that we have within the business has changed the response that we've started receiving. So from a technical point of view, I know my stuff. But when I was the one who was, I suppose, playing the role of business development manager, it took much longer sometimes to A, get a response, B, build those relationships. And also there was a sense of needing to build trust and really over deliver in order to win that trust and that business. Whereas when I changed the face of the business in terms of hiring non-Black staff, which presents a lot of internal conflict for me, because I shouldn't have to do that, but it is just a reality. The pace with which we were moving as a business just changed. And yes, so that's a very real example.
It's incredible as well. I mean, I guess this comes from people buy from people or build instant relationships with people that they look like. But it's actually been amazing how quickly that has changed, like your sales and your results has changed.
Absolutely. I mean, contacts that were always on our list, that we had tried to start building relationships through social selling, things like that. As you know, I use my LinkedIn profile principally for any marketing essentially in this space. And I've seen a real difference since we've, hired in different people to do those roles.
And how does that make you, obviously as a person, that'll make you feel one way. How does it make you feel towards those clients?
Look, I mean, I always say this, there's no feelings in business, is there? You can't take anything personally. And so it is what it is. I know that we're brilliant at what we're doing. I know the trajectory that we're on. I also know the results that we can get them. And so in the end, we're going to win the business, which we do. And that's that, really.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible of you to swallow that kind of pride and make those big decisions.
Yeah, you have to though, right? Because
you're going to build the business at the end of the day. You're going to build a business.
And it's a brilliant area. I love that mix of event and tech. And it's a wide open sea at the moment. It's such a potentially very creative area if you have that right match of technical experience and a great client who wants to push some boundaries or is just putting their foot into kind of the virtual event pool. So it is what it is, right? We're going to grow this business. and that's what we do.
Yeah. Another example that we've talked about before that perhaps we can touch upon is you were saying about when I think you were a speaker at an event. Yeah.
Yeah. So quite often people don't realize I'm a speaker, especially maybe if there wasn't any kind of visual pre-marketing with like pictures of speakers. And sometimes I'll go to an event and no one will talk to me, or the other speakers aren't expecting me to be a speaker. So I will go maybe to the area that we've been directed to, and they just think maybe I'm just hanging about or loitering. I'm quite a friendly person, and I will I'm quite jovial. So, I'll find something to talk about to maybe break the ice, start a conversation. But there is that, you can see the look of shock when they realize that I'm a speaker, when we're all called up and I'm on the stage next to them. I've been asked before to either clear away something or give directions towards the table, because it's just assumed that I am a waitress or the receptionist, etc. And unfortunately, it is not just your imagination. It is just because of what you look like, and actually most of the time I'm the only person of color in the room, especially in the events world, and especially if you're mixing events and tech together, you tend to be the only person of color in the room.
I find it absolutely mind-blowing that still happens. And I'm sure, because you're so gracious, that you wouldn't be annoyed at these people who are making those assumptions. But it must be really hard.
You just have to crack on, because again, usually I'm there in the capacity of some type of marketing for our business. And sometimes, there are moments where I think to myself, hence why I've made those recent changes, I know if I looked different, there'll just be other challenges, right? Business isn't easy. You always win and lose clients. But I also know that I could remove some of the friction or the uncertainty if I wasn't at the forefront. Or only was at the forefront when it's convenient, essentially, for us. And not other people.
But you're so funny, because you said that you have shown people to their seats before. Here you are, madam. Can I get you a cup of tea?
Why not? You know what I mean?
And then when they see you on stage, they must be like, oh.
Yeah, why not? And this is the thing in life, it's, you just get used to it. You do get used to it. And as I say, realistically, there are moments, because it's quite ironic actually, because I sit at my desk and I think, right, I have a brilliant idea, we've researched the market, blah blah blah, and I even forget the way I look. So I will call somebody, or I'll go to an event, but then there are moments when I remember all my skin color, because other people notice it. Obviously I don't. So there are moments where but again, you put your personal aside, because ultimately we have some very clear goals as a business, and when you have employees, it's not just about you either. They come first, and so that is why I made those very key changes in terms of who we had, who were front facing, taking calls and emails and making those initial introductions.
I feel like I could ask loads more questions about this, but I've also got lots of other questions. So I've got maybe about 10 questions from people that have sent them through to Selling Savvy when I've been posting about it and stuff. So we'll go through them.
Brilliant.
First of all, maybe you could just give us a little snippet about white privilege and what you see that as being.
So look, that's a really triggering phrase, isn't it? We've seen a lot of conversation about white privilege and people's feelings. It does trigger and provoke a lot of emotions when people think about that. Because the reality is that, especially if you're in the UK, that word privilege is often linked to class because of the class system that has existed here. And so people often think, well, I'm working class, so to speak. I didn't grow up well off. I worked for everything that I have. My parents were hardworking. And so when you're talking about white privilege specifically, it's not really linked to any of those things. It really is just linked to whiteness itself.
Yeah, I think it's the word privilege that confuses people, isn't it?
Exactly. And I suspect very much that term white privilege was developed in academic environments. I suspect it, and at a time maybe when the white majority didn't even know really what systemic racism was. And so now that we're living in 2020 and post Black Lives Matter, that term is being used, probably not in the original context it was created and understood. I often think about that because ultimately no one really uses the word privilege in that way much anymore. And so, so essentially what it's saying is that just because by default, it's just a given thing, if you are white, there are certain, either there's certain privileges you have or you're not put at a disadvantage. And probably that's a better way of describing it, really. It's not about what you've been given, it's more about what you don't have to
fight for.
Right. Yeah. And in a very real context, if we look at, for example, in the US, and you look at when there were the Jim Crow laws and segregation, that was white privilege to be able to go into a diner and order from the counter. Because if you were Black, you wouldn't be able to do that. It was a privilege.
But realistically, that shouldn't be a privilege. It should just be normal.
For everyone, right?
Yeah,
so that's where you can see in practice what is really meant by white privilege, which is I can sit in the front of the bus. I can go into a diner and order food. I can use those toilets and not the toilets that are labelled.
And similarly, in our world now, I can apply for those jobs and I can feel safe in my job. And I can appear, and my people of my race will appear on marketing and on billboards.
Yes, exactly. So when you join a new group, a network of people, you're likely to see people who look like you. If you buy an item for your child, you're likely to find a doll or a toy that is similar in appearance to your child. Those are just, they have become normal privileges, which should just be a normal thing for everybody. So I understand that term is really, as I say, it's quite controversial. It's become controversial. But what we try to always do, well, when I'm talking to people, is kind of just empower yourself. So now that you realize that maybe just because of your whiteness, even if it's not conscious on your part, what can you do to mitigate other people's disadvantage? So it's not about depriving yourself or anything being taken from yourself. It's actually about how we can highlight how other people's disadvantages can be reduced or mitigated because of the colour of their skin.
Okay, and one of the questions I've got here, which is a really interesting one, how do you feel towards people who are typically white privileged people?
As what have I said to you? I don't really have feelings about this stuff, right?
Because you could feel frustrated, a bit resentful, I guess.
Look, it's the system
that
needs to change. It's not the system needs to change. Really, that's what it is, right? It's the system that needs to change, and individual human beings who don't think that the system needs to change, right? They are really the problems and the blocks to progression. It's not really every single white person the same way it's not every single Black person. Do you know what I mean? It's really the system.
And I guess it's nobody's fault, but it becomes their fault when they ignore it.
Yes, exactly, right? So, as I say, there are always individual human beings who know maybe what advantages they have, and they, of course, don't want to let those go. Well, those individual human beings, unfortunately, we just have to work around them, is the reality. But outside of that, it's really the system that we're trying to change. And it's very difficult to do that if the majority doesn't also
want to change.
Exactly.
But I don't, since working with you and trying to bring this to more of a forefront, I don't feel like I've given up any privileges. Like, it's not like I've diminished myself by working closer with you. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know. But, it's like anything though, isn't it? I recognise I'm an able-bodied person. And so I don't have the lived experience of having a type of a physical disability. But it would be ridiculous of me to say, well, no, we're not going to put a ramp on the front of the building because
I can walk upstairs. So
right, and you know what? The fittest people always get to enter the building, right? And it's the same thing when people say the best people get the job. That's not always the case. That's why I literally could say, well, the healthiest people get into the building.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's utterly
Could
ridiculous.
you imagine? I think you'd be sued.
Exactly. It's just insane to say that. The fact is, you notice someone may have a disadvantage in some type of way, and so you try to mitigate that by providing access.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. How do you, I know we've mentioned this before as well, but how do you feel about kind of since the Black Lives Matter movement, there's been some people who've brought more Black people to the forefront by including them on panels and things.
Yeah.
What is your opinions on that kind of obvious panel of 6 people and one of them is Black?
Yeah. Well, look, you can only work with the numbers that you've got. Okay, so, and this is why deeper work about just healthy workplace culture and healthy ideas and beliefs is so important, because ultimately, to get anything started, you need to kickstart a car, you need to kickstart your metabolism, you've got to make an effort. And so it might be really obvious that suddenly you're eating salads 4 times a week. But it is what it is.
That, but yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, you've got to start somewhere.
Got to start somewhere. So if someone's like, well, how come you're eating healthily? It's like, well, because I'm trying to lose weight. That's why.
Yeah.
And so it's the same in this area, right? If you have to start doing it, it does need to be conscious. It might mean that people notice, but hey, it is what it is. And actually, as I said to you earlier, if there was more variety in general across any characteristic, we wouldn't even notice.
Yeah.
We wouldn't notice. And so I think it's totally okay, especially at the start.
Yeah. At the beginning, where we're at now, trying to push it forward.
Yeah.
What is your opinion on the phrase Bein?
Yeah, so it's a complicated phrase. The long and short of it is that most people or groups of people who come under or who are categorized under that term are not happy to be categorized under it, because again, it doesn't give you any advantages, right? That's like saying, we say things like British people, for example, but actually within that, there are all different types of people within that, right? And it's funny actually, because I was thinking this morning, you can be Welsh, you can be Scottish, you can be Irish. But if you had a lineup or a group of those people, they might all appear to the eye to be white, even though they have very distinct cultural experiences. That is exactly what you get with Bein, right? Essentially, it's anyone who's not white is under that category. The experience of someone who's South Asian, for example, or East Asian is vastly different from someone who might be West African or North African. So that's why that term is problematic.
Okay.
Right? Because our experiences are different. Our cultural identities are different. And when you talk about economics, for example, and socioeconomic experiences, they're also very different. For example, you could have somebody who was born in East Asia who came to England in their adult life. Their experiences are going to be vastly different, particularly in 2020, from someone of East Asian heritage who was born and has always been raised here, right?
Yeah.
So that's why that term can be problematic, because it doesn't really show and reflect the different cultural experiences, and therefore the kind of very specific ways probably we should be interacting with these different groups of people.
Yeah. And the different experiences they've had throughout their lives with regards to their
precisely ethnicity. And also it skews things like statistics. So for example, you'll be able to have a large organization say, oh yeah, we've got 11% Bein, but when you drill down to it, they've got 3 South Asian individuals. They've never hired any other type of individual.
That's very interesting.
It's not necessarily a reflect. That's the same way we see now. No, we are a diverse organization, and when you dig deeper, they have 10 white women.
Right.
The rest are white men. That isn't true diversity. It's a start, but there may not be enough women, first of all. And anyway, all of those women are white. If you want to drill down a bit further, maybe all those women went to Oxford University.
Yeah.
Right? So then that's not necessarily diversity. But
Yeah.
because of the kind of this kind of homogenous term that's used, it skews data and statistics, but it also does not hold those organizations accountable, because in reality, they're not diverse.
Fascinating. What is your opinion on Blackout Tuesday, the Black Squares?
Yeah. I mean, look, again, from the point of view of organizations, there's no onus for you to post on that day, post a square on that day, say anything online, right? Because ultimately, what's more important is, again, what is the culture within your organization? There's no point in posting if actually your actions and the day-to-day happenings within your organization don't reflect whatever statement you made on social media.
I think there's been some large companies that have realised that since, aren't there?
Yeah, and I mean, you know, our good friend Lils made a brilliant point when she talked about some of these companies had unethical practices in the first place. Look, outside of race.
Yeah, that's true.
Fast fashion brands, they've got very unethical, murky workings behind closed doors in terms of how they source products and, you know, how much they pay people in other countries who are manufacturing these goods.
Yeah. I found Blackout Tuesday quite frustrating, not to start with because I didn't really understand it, but I actually didn't post a black square because I didn't feel like I understood it enough to realise what it actually meant. And after that Tuesday, after that kind of obviously George Floyd and everything, and talking to you, I researched it a lot more, and actually then it made me quite frustrated because I felt like it was a bit of a trend.
Yes. So, and this is the thing, again, the difference between social media and just real life. Okay. We use social media now for everything, which is not entirely helpful, really, because you can use social media to do marketing for something quite serious. And you can also use social media for a TikTok dance, right? So all of these things have become on the same level.
Yeah.
And so it is very difficult to detect sometimes the origins, the true meaning and purpose behind something that people are trying to create momentum around, essentially. And I think that's what happened, unfortunately.
It felt quite flippant.
Exactly. But again, it's understanding that difference between real life and social media.
And I'm sure that lots of people, I mean, I don't know how many people post it, millions, I'm sure lots of people posted it and haven't thought about it again.
And that's understandable.
And I think if it had been in memory of George Floyd, it would have been different. But because they were sort of saying, I don't know, we're going to help with this movement, and now that was like a month ago.
Yeah. And so look, and again, it's that separation between social media
actions
and real life
and social media,
and also there is that kind of backdrop of COVID where social media is everybody's workplace now. You know, usually there were separate conversations happening when you went to the breakout area, or if you're in the lift or you're walking to Starbucks or Pret, to what the conversation you'd have if you're sitting at your desk or in a meeting room. Right. So at the moment, though, all of those conversations are converging online in the public domain. That is dangerous, really, because it leads to misunderstandings. It leads to, you know, public calling out and shaming and blaming and all of those things, because where else are people going to have this conversation? Because this is our workplace, unfortunately, at the moment.
Yeah, that's really true. People become keyboard warriors.
But really, if it's not something you'd say if you were sitting in the office, if you wouldn't get up from your desk and shout that out to the whole floor, you probably shouldn't be saying it online.
Very true. That's a good way of putting it.
I don't understand. It really, I don't get it, because you probably wouldn't, even if you really feel that way, you probably wouldn't say it in the office.
Yeah,
but,
true.
You know.
So another interesting question here. Is it offensive if I compliment or ask questions about a black woman's hair if it comes from a place of genuine interest or admiration?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and it speaks to the difference between intent and impact, and I think I'd add on to that context. And what I mean by that is sometimes we don't mean to do something, right? We don't mean for an outcome, but that is the impact it has on somebody or a group of people. And so we sometimes have to think about impact first before our intention. It's very much like if I step on someone's foot and break their toes, I can say to them, I didn't mean for you to feel pain.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is, though, their toes are broken and they felt pain. So I can't continue to say, well, I didn't mean to do that.
Yeah.
Because the intent pales in significance to the impact of me stepping on their toes, right? So it's very much the same as that. And then when you think about context, so again, historically, in general, especially Black women's hair and their bodies has been fetishized, it's been commercialized, hypersexualized, and so it isn't necessarily a compliment for a Black woman. For somebody to necessarily make comments or observations that you don't know, because usually this is stranger situations, or you're in work, which is why context is important, and somebody starts touching your hair unprovoked.
Oh, yeah, definitely. That's to any race, though. If you came up to me and started stroking my head, I think you were weird.
Well, exactly.
But I think,
believe it or not, it happens quite commonly.
Really?
Sometimes that your white colleagues, a white manager will literally just reach out and touch your hair or pull your hair. Even me, you know, I wear a head wrap because I enjoy wearing head wraps. It's also cultural. But what has happened, many a time I might be out and somebody literally will tug on it.
Oh my gosh.
Or try to take it off.
And do they try to take it off? Oh my God, what is wrong with these people?
These things happen.
Do they say anything? Do they say, oh, this is interesting, or anything?
Sometimes and sometimes not. And obviously I'm not expecting them to reach out.
Tug on your head?
Yes.
That's really strange.
So this is why context is really important. In the workplace, especially if you're a manager or a fellow colleague, that's probably not an appropriate context within which you make comments about somebody's appearance. But what you could do is open up a conversation in a discreet way. So maybe you do sit next to me at work and we do have a genuine rapport. And if you are curious about my hair, about why I may wrap my hair, I don't know, some other element of my being, because we have a rapport, you can say, Ashanti, you know, I've always wondered, or I'd like to ask
Yeah,
you,
I was going to say that.
Are you okay with me asking you?
Yeah.
When you do that to people you actually know and that you may have a rapport with, 9 times out of 10, you'll get an answer and no offense will
be taken. That's exactly what I was thinking as you're talking, that I feel like, well, I would hope to think that if I was to ask you questions,
yes,
then we know each other well enough that you would tell me because you know it was from a place of interest. Whereas if I was at the park with my son and I saw somebody with a head wrap and I went up and was like, oh, that's interesting, then
it's just weird.
Completely different. Yeah,
right, and that's the point. So it's not, and again,
context.
It's about context. And at work, people forget in general. So for example, you know, when we talked about Me Too and workplace sexual harassment, if you are a manager of any gender and you continually make comments about somebody's body over a period of time, yes, that can be deemed to be inappropriate. Why? Because of the context. You're at work.
Yeah.
There are structures here.
Yeah.
You might be in authority.
Yeah.
So it is not appropriate for you to make those comments about that woman or man's body, what they wear. Do you understand? It's really quite basic and simple, but what you'll still hear people is say, oh, I was just flirting or being complimentary. It's inappropriate within the work context to do that. And so that's the same thing. It's in normal life, if you are friends or you have, maybe it's a neighbor, or maybe you take your child to a play group and there's somebody there that you always have a little chat with, you are transparent. You say, hey, look, I've always wondered, would you mind if I asked you about, and proceed? They're more than likely to give you the answer to that question. Yeah. If they're a stranger or you're in a work or in a business meeting, I've had that in a business meeting about something completely not related. Yeah. And then I will have somebody, usually males, make, you know, inappropriate comments, or something out of nowhere. They ask me, did you see that thing about 50 Cent? And I'm like, I don't even listen to his music.
Just because I'm Black doesn't mean I know 50 Cent.
Right?
That's so crazy.
And they might say to me, well, I was just trying to make common ground or break bread with you. It's like, well, why would you do it on that thing?
Yeah.
Because
especially if you work in the same place, there are so many other things that you could discuss.
To talk about, precisely.
Yeah, things in common.
So if you're curious and you want to know, there are things like Google, there's YouTube, and if you have a rapport with someone, you do what you would do about anything else.
I really like the phrase that I really like the phrase that you've used a couple of times as an example of, do you mind if I ask you about it? Because it gives people a get out clause if they feel uncomfortable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I would do that, I don't know, I don't have children, for example, but I work with a lot of people who do. And so I don't know, if I was curious about, and it's very weird, but I would say, would you mind if I asked you about blah, blah, blah?
Yeah.
Sometimes there'll be women talking, I don't know, about,
it's a very respectful way of putting it. Yeah.
I'm not just going to ask you.
How was your labour?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Is that a cesarean scar? You know what I mean? You're in the gym changing room and you see someone changing, you think, oh, that's a scar. Then you point at it across the room, or you start trying to touch their scar. That is weird.
It is weird.
But that's what happens.
It's
sometimes
just
as a black
crazy.
woman.
Yeah.
People just come up to you in the street, or you're at work minding your business, getting a drink from the vending machine, and somebody comes up and starts, palming the back of your head. It is weird.
It's weird. I feel like this is so eye-opening. I mean, I feel very naive. I had no idea.
Someone will come and tug on your hair. And look, we've interacted many other times online, and I may have had a different hairstyle. Black women get asked regularly, so what happened to your hair? Well, of course I've still got hair, but I've just wrapped it today.
Yeah.
Right? So, but again, if we're friends or we have a respectful rapport, you could ask me, I noticed that you've covered your hair today. Is there a reason for that?
Yeah.
Right? And it's just normal kind of basic human decency and interaction.
Politeness, manners.
I would avoid offence or conflict.
Yeah. Fascinating. I've learned so much. So we've got a couple more questions.
Yes.
What do you think is the best way to raise a child who is aware of race in a positive sense if they grow up in a mostly white environment?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, nowadays, again, there are lots of great Instagram accounts and YouTube accounts that are all about how you talk to your child about race and how you develop their understanding of what race really is. Look, a lot of people are, again, well-intentioned, and at its most basic level, they tend to teach their children that everybody's equal regardless of the colour of their skin.
Yeah.
The challenge with that is that, yes, that is true, and it should be true. It might be true in your household, but in the bigger, wider world, it's not true.
It's not true in practice. Yeah.
And that's the part that a lot of parents aren't necessarily teaching their children. So they go along in life really believing that everywhere else and everybody else has that same belief as what they've been taught by their parents.
I feel like that's exactly what I'm like. I mean, all of these stories, like, this shocks me so much. I had no idea.
Yeah. And so it's that second piece. And that's why when you see people now begin to talk about being anti-racist as opposed to I'm just not racist. The anti-racism part is actually understanding, recognizing, acknowledging that there are some things that put you at a disadvantage in certain places. And one of those things can be the color of your skin. And just merely recognizing that and understanding real life examples like you and I have discussed, that's the difference in terms of how you're, explaining the concept of race to your child. At its most basic level, we should all be equal. But unfortunately, in places, for different reasons, we don't necessarily get treated in an equal fashion.
Yeah.
That's really what it is. But I would definitely recommend looking on YouTube and Instagram. There are some brilliant accounts that are set up that are just about how you talk to your children about race.
So interesting. That's really useful. Because, I mean, this question actually wasn't from me, but it's from a friend of mine who lives close to me. And we are in a very white area. I mean, I went to a school of maybe, I think there was 900 in my school, and there was 5 black people.
Yeah. I mean, what's also interesting, I find this interesting, is that you may well live in an area that is predominantly white. Maybe the school that your child goes to is predominantly white. The media that they're consuming isn't predominantly white, though.
No.
So that's the difference, right? So even though they're in your home, even if you look, okay, so not lots of kids programs have different kind of people, not lots of kids books, but if they're on YouTube, if they're watching music, if they enjoy music, for example, it's not predominantly white.
Yeah.
Okay, so they are coming into contact with people who look different all of the time through
without
the media,
you even realizing it. Yeah,
that
which
you're
is
consuming.
good. Yeah.
It's good, but it also means, though, if you haven't provided that context of, again, how race can disadvantage some people, they could go along in life genuinely believing that everybody
the world is racist,
treated equally, and it's not the case. And the reason why that becomes very important is that when you look at younger generations, they will be the next set of managers in these corporations. They will be the next set of politicians, the next set of doctors. And if they don't understand that some people are at a disadvantage because of many things, as I say, it's probably important to teach your kids about disability and all of these other things as well. They will then carry some of these beliefs into those roles as well, and then maybe some of the decisions that they make may, negatively impact different groups of people.
Yeah. And I think as well, like you say, they're the next managers, the next doctors and everything. So if we educate them in that not only everybody is equal, but that sometimes they're not treated equal, then hopefully they'll be making a conscious effort when they are older to make sure that their businesses or whatever surgeries are diverse,
inclusive, all of those things. I mean, when you look at statistics of, black women are 5 times more likely to die in childbirth in England. The health treatment is different for a black woman. Okay, you can complain about pain, for example, and this is in medical papers. There was a belief that black women could just deal with more pain. But what that was doing was killing them, because it meant that, doctors would not take pain complaints seriously when it came from a black woman. And so they were dying. Okay, 5 times more likely in 2020 to die in childbirth.
Oh my God.
And so this is why the beliefs and ideas that we have are so powerful if they're not challenged from a young age.
Wow. Amazing. So this is our last question.
Okay.
What are your thoughts, or does it ever bother you when you see interracial couples? It's quite a funny one.
Question. The answer to that again is no.
I can imagine that you don't care.
Don't care. Live your life, please.
Yeah.
Again, no feelings or thoughts. I mean, I suppose I should say as well, I don't represent every single black person or black woman, for the reasons why we talked about earlier, right? That term Bein is too generic. It doesn't reflect personal feelings.
That's the same as everybody. My beliefs aren't the same as my colleagues' beliefs,
But ironically, sometimes, because I tend to be the only black woman who maybe in the event space is
spokesperson,
people assume that every other black person feels the same way as me, and it's not the case. So there's probably people who will watch this and think, well, I've met somebody who said that they do find it problematic, or they don't agree with it. So it's possible that somebody else has a different opinion. Look, again, on the face of it, it's your life. Choose who you want to be with and be happy, right? But again, one thing I will say is that often there's a historical backdrop to why people have certain feelings about, or thoughts and ideas and beliefs about interracial relationships. I'll take it to an example. Again, when you look at segregation in somewhere like South Africa or the United States, at one point it was illegal for me as a black person to go into a diner and order my food. I'd have to go into the back door or at a different time. So you can understand the conflict that arises if a white individual and a black individual decide to be in a relationship, right? At certain times in history, that was very impractical.
Just generally on a practical basis.
Just very impractical and also illegal. There's that famous case in the US of that couple who got married at a time when it was illegal to do so. So this is why it is it is really important to understand the historical context behind certain things. That is why potentially, predominantly white societies didn't agree if maybe a black person and a white person decided to go into a union. That is why for some black people, and again, I hate using that term because we could be talking about black people from Africa, the Caribbean. There's so many places in the world where there are black people, but at a certain point in history, it was impractical, it was illegal. And on top of that, there are certain advantages, again, economic advantages. So if you chose to, you just think about at a certain time in history, mixed race children, i.e. one parent black, one person white, they experienced discrimination, but at the same time, they were able to take advantage of certain privileges. Why? One person, one parent was white. So that meant they had access to certain economics, certain resources. So it's really important sometimes to have these conversations within the right context. Right? And so it's very strange now that now it's not illegal to have interracial relationships. Now maybe there aren't, massive economic benefits everywhere in the world to choosing to have a white partner. Now we have conversations about whether it's moral or the right thing to do, when in actual fact it was always okay. It's just in certain, countries, because of racism, it became not okay, which is ironic, right? So now it is legal, and now we have a conversation about morality, when in actual fact it was always okay.
It should just be normal. Yeah.
You date who you want to date, right? Live your life. But unfortunately, because of how complicated human beings have made life, and the fact that we do like to be dominant and have control over other people, we've made even something as pure as loving someone or being attracted to someone
a topic for discussion. Yeah, that's true.
And so that's what I would say more about that, is about context. And in this day and age in 2020, I suspect that younger people have less concerns about relationships.
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. Thank you so much for being so honest. And I always find that you're so gracious with these things. And I think when you talked at the summit recently, somebody said that you've educated everybody, and the one thing you haven't done is moan. I don't think I've ever heard you moan.
No, it's just a waste of time, guys. If you've been black for any length of time, complaining is just a waste of your energy, right? A lot of black people, not all, but a lot of black people at the very core, it's about survival, essentially, right? Because life can be very challenging in environments that don't welcome and embrace you. And so you've got to invest your energy in ways that helps you, as I say, survive and, ideally thrive in your life. And so moaning is not, something that I tend to do. I don't have the luxury of moaning.
Yeah. Well, thank you
for having
so
me.
much. No probs.